people probably aren't going to notice that difference. After all, it's not that much. What is up, YouTube? Welcome to Fred's Full Throttle. Today I'm going to be doing a deep dive video to help you decide between getting the C8 Z06 in a coupe or the Hard Top Convertible. This is my fourth deep dive video. I'm picking out the options for the C8 Z06, so feel free to check out the others. I'm going to link them below. First, I'll be going over the two options, then covering the pros and cons of each. I'm going to then talk over some of the subjective considerations, and then lastly, I'm going to share my take on what I will spec my own C8 Z06 build with. We've got a lot to cover, so let's jump right in. Alright, so starting out, there are two options for the C8 Z06 for roofs. You have the coupe, and then you have the Hard Top Convertible, also known as the HTC. These are the same options that you get on the C8 Stingray as well. First, let's talk about the coupe. The coupe is the standard car. The roof appears to be a normal roof, however it's actually removable. This means that every Corvette is a convertible. However, it's not quite as easy as a regular convertible. You see, Chevy adopted a Targa style roof setup, which means that the roof panel is removable. However, you need to physically get out of the car to remove it yourself, rather than actuating some mechanism to do it for you. The roof is held in place with 3 latches, which are pretty quick to open, and then you open up the trunk of your car and you can actually stow it securely in the trunk. It uses the same mounting points to hold it in the trunk as it does when it's installed as the roof, so this means it's held firmly and won't slide or move around in the back. Close up the trunk and now you're ready to drive. The whole process takes maybe 2 to 3 minutes for the first few times you do it, and then probably around a minute or so once you're familiar and comfortable with it. For the roof panels themselves, there are 3 options. There's the standard painted roof, which is 15.5 pounds, the transparent panel, which weighs 17 pounds, and then a carbon fiber roof with visible carbon fiber that weighs 14 pounds. The transparent panel is tinted to help it cut down on UV and heat, though in hotter climates I've heard of owners actually buying removable liners that they can use to block out more sunlight. Now up next we have the HTC, the Hard Top Convertible. That's exactly what you think it is. At the press of a button, the roof will retract, stow in the back of the car, and it can do that at speeds of up to 30 miles an hour. The total time for that takes about 16 seconds, and the car can do this with the engine on or off, and it can even lower the roof from your key fob, though you can't raise it the same way. Unlike all other generations of Corvette before it, the C8 is actually a folding hardtop convertible. So that means that there's no cloth top, no fabric, no plastic rear windows, and overall it gives the car much cleaner lines. Chevy also adopted a styling that's more in line with other upmarket brands like Ferrari by having nacelles behind both seats to draw out the lines of the car. The convertible mechanism is manufactured by a company called Webasto, which is a company that designs and builds all of the folding hardtops for brands like Ferrari, Mercedes, even McLaren. This means they're pulling on over 20 years of experience to design a robust, reliable, and light system. Now that we've covered the basics of both roofs, you may already have an idea of which sounds better to you. But hold on, there's quite a bit more to it for most of us than just, do I want to press a button or do I want to get out of the car to remove the roof? As with all options I've covered so far in the other videos, there are actually a lot of factors you may want to consider when deciding which option to pick. So let's go into the pros and cons of each. First, let's get into the Coupe Pros. Engine bay visibility. One of the big selling points for the coupe is that you have a view of the engine bay. This lets you see the LT6 engine in the Z06 or the LT2 in the Stingray and show off that beating heart of the car. After all, the engine in the Z06 is the biggest factor that makes this car unique among all other Corvettes. Being able to see it at all times is pretty great. Not to mention, you can even see it from in the cabin of the car if you look over your shoulder, reminding you that you're in a mid-engine Corvette, not a front engine. Less expensive. The hardtop convertible option is about $7,500, so right away this option saves you some significant money, and if you don't need or want the convenience of pushing a button to remove the roof, you can still remove it yourself manually. So for a lot of people, this might be a good way to save some cash for some other options. Lighter. The coupe is about 77 pounds lighter than the convertible. This isn't a huge amount, less than the amount of an average passenger, but it's also not nothing. This translates into slightly better performance, slightly better fuel economy, handling, etc. Most people probably aren't going to notice that difference. After all, it's not that much, but it's there for those who want the lightest possible car. Quieter. The coupe has a pane of glass between you and the engine bay, and then another layer of glass over the engine on the rear hatch. Though the engine is right there, this does dampen your ability to hear the exhaust when you're in the car. That said, the Z06 in general is significantly louder at all RPMs than the Stingray, so I don't think anyone's going to have too much trouble hearing the car. Clear roof panel option. Some people prefer the feel of a sunroof, which you can essentially get via the transparent roof panel I mentioned a little while ago. The hardtop convertible doesn't offer a comparable option, so if you want to be able to see the sky with the top up, the coupe is really your only choice. Option to add a roll bar. From the factory, Chevy doesn't include a hard fixed roll bar in either car. The A-pillar, which is the frame of the windshield, is the primary load-bearing structure and the part of the car designed to hold up in a rollover. However, the aftermarket, especially for track applications, have provided multiple options for roll bars as well as harness bars for safety harnesses in the coupe. So far, I actually haven't seen anything available for the hardtop convertible. Now let's move on to the cons for the coupe. Keeping the engine bay clean. One of the things I've heard most from C8 owners is complaints about the coupe having an engine bay that gets really dirty easily. If you haven't spent any time up close with any of the C8s, the vents along the side of the rear windows on the hatch are actually completely open vents into the engine bay. This is obviously for cooling and venting reasons. However, if hot air can come out, dust, rain, and other debris can come right in. If you drive it all in the rain, your engine bay is going to need a cleaning as the water is going to flow in and leave water spots everywhere. Now I should point out that even on prior generations of the car, if you drove in the rain, your engine bay would generally get pretty wet and dirty. However, the difference here is that now, since you can see the engine, it's a lot more apparent. Decreased cabin sound from the exhaust. While I mentioned the quietness earlier above as a pro, the downside to that is that there's actually less engine noise in the cabin. For some that's a plus, but many people are going to want to hear that LT6 as much as possible. Removing the roof fills the trunk. When you do remove the roof panel on the coupe, it completely fills the trunk. So if you take a trip or pack some bags, that roof is staying up because you're not going to have anywhere to put it. You do still maintain access to the frunk, but it's a lot less storage, so that's something to keep in mind if you plan on doing longer drives. You have to stop to completely remove the roof. While just a matter of effort, for many, stopping to take the roof off is either too much effort or is just easy to forget. My C7 obviously has a removable roof, and in the 5 years I've owned the car, I've actually only taken it off for driving 3 times. It's not that I don't enjoy it, I honestly just forget, or when I do remember, I'm fine with just rolling down the windows and keeping going. Risk of roof damage or dropping. The last big con that comes to mind is the risk of damage to the roof panel. Even with its lightweight, removing the roof and carrying it to the trunk needs to be done carefully and in a specific order, such as opening the trunk before you try to remove the roof. This does open the door, so to speak, for damage or dropping it accidentally. Certainly once you do it a few times, it becomes more familiar, but I know when I've always removed my roof, I've always been a little bit stressed about it. It's not heavy, but it is bulky and can be a bit awkward to move around smoothly or if you're by yourself. Alright, now that we've covered the pros and cons of the coupe, let's move on to the pros and cons of the hardtop convertible. We're going to start with the pros. Ease of use. First, and easily the most obvious, is the ease of removing the roof. As long as you can press a button, you can raise or lower the roof. It's quick, it's easy, and it lets you focus more on the enjoyment and the driving than dealing with physically removing the panel. Sound. Next, due to the design, you have one less window between you and the exhaust tips. On top of that, the mid window actually can be lowered on the hardtop convertible, so you have a completely unobstructed line to the back of your car. This window can even be open in light rain, so you can get all that exhaust sound without having to have all your windows up, and you'll even stay dry in the process. Use of the trunk with the roof off. One of the bigger points I've heard from current C8 owners is that you can retain the full use of the trunk with the roof down. So on a road trip or a longer drive, you can actually stow a lot of possessions in your rear trunk, still raise and lower the roof however you want without having to pick between the two. Headroom. There are a bunch of articles online about this, but the gist of it is that there's a bit more headroom in the hardtop convertible for us taller drivers. This also comes into play for anyone who wants to do some track work and needs to wear a helmet. There's roughly 1.5 to 2 inches more headroom available in most seating positions in the hardtop convertible. I say most because it does depend a little bit on where you've moved the seat, how reclined it is, those kind of things. The biggest improvement here is that there isn't a bulkhead that the coupe has for the connections to attach to the roof. Of course, in the coupe, if you slide the seat forward a couple inches or have a more upright backrest, you'll be ahead of that bulkhead, so it won't apply to you. However, with me as a 6'4" giant, every bit of extra headroom is appreciated. Roof off, feeling more open. In the HTC, having the roof down is closer to the normal convertible feel that prior generation Corvettes have had. You don't have as well defined a B-pillar as with a coupe, and not having the B-pillar connect all the way across behind the seats is a big part of this. Less wind buffeting at higher speeds. At highway speeds with the roof down, I've heard that the hardtop convertible has a little bit less wind buffeting with all the windows down than the coupe does in the same configuration. This does sound a bit based on your height and your seating position, but from the looking I did online, it sounded like this was the majority consensus. That said, most people probably have the top down at 70 miles an hour and below rather than staying up at highway speeds, so this might be a little bit less of a concern for you. Alright, so those are the pros, but now let's go over the cons of the hardtop convertible. Can't see the engine. Right out of the gate, the big one that most people cite is that you can't see the engine. This is especially apparent because this is a mid-engine car. So for some, this is a make or break option, and if that matters to you, the hardtop convertible might not be the right car. More expensive. Next, there's no getting around that the hardtop convertible is a roughly $7,500 option. With the prices for a well-optioned Z06 likely well into the six figures, this could be one of those first options that people axe when they're looking to keep prices as low as possible. Wait, the hardtop convertible, as I mentioned earlier, is 77 pounds heavier than the coupe. If performance is your main concern and you're going to be doing a lot of track time, then this added weight might be a consideration. Speaking of track viability. Now this is a bit of a prickly subject. I investigated this, I've asked around, and I found a couple things to consider. First, NASA, no not that NASA, has included the C8 hardtop convertible as an approved convertible for HPDE events. This means that many tracks and organizations approve of the car for light to moderate track use in a non-competition setting. However, be aware that there are a few mitigations here. First, this doesn't approve the car for racing. Track days are one thing, but it sounds likely that it is not approved for race duty. If you really want to race, and you likely don't care about the hardtop convertible to begin with, but you'll need to actually take this up with your racing organization to make sure it's allowed. Next, while I could find plentiful options for harness bars, roll bars, and other things like that for the coupe, I couldn't find anything for the hardtop convertible. This doesn't mean they don't exist, but if you're a serious track day person, you may want to double check to make sure you can get the required safety equipment for your car before you go down that road and pick that option. Lastly, the biggest reason for all this complexity is because the C8 doesn't have a true roll bar. The window frame or the A-pillar of the windshield is the primary load-bearing structure of the car, for both the hardtop convertible and the coupe. The nacelles on the hardtop convertible are reinforced, but they're not the same strength you'd get as with a dedicated roll bar. For comparison, this is the same type of design that the C7s use, having the A-pillar as the primary rollover protection. Recently, there was a C7 Z06 that rolled over at fairly low speeds on track, and you can see from the aftermath that the windshield worked as intended, but the car was essentially a pancake. Both occupants were a little bruised up, but thankfully okay. Now with safety, when higher speeds are involved, especially in a car with so much power, adding safety mechanisms is a really good idea, especially if you plan to push the car on the track. And then lastly, just because NASA or other organizations or tracks do sign off on the car, that sign off can be superseded by any local track group or organization that's hosting an event. This means that if a track approves of the hardtop convertible for an event, you can still be declined at tech inspection if the organization hosting the event has a no convertibles policy. Definitely worth looking into if the track is in your future. Most autocross and other low speed events should be okay, but for those looking to do significant track days, the HTC just might not be the right choice. Now that we've covered the pros and cons of each, there are a couple categories that were either washes or are subjective in nature. I heard several people in the forums question the long-term ability of the hardtop convertible. However, in those same threads, there were very few examples people could point to of it actually having mechanical problems. The mechanism itself is built, as I mentioned, by a company that does this for cars much more expensive than the Corvette, and they have a long track record of overall good reliability. The what-if crowd may never fully trust something like the hardtop convertible in the long term. However, I couldn't find any real concrete examples of this on many C8s, and I think this worry is a bit unfounded. Stiffness. The C8 in general and the Z06 were both designed from the ground up to be without a roof. The chassis is unchanged between them, and the roof plays minimal, if any, structural part of the overall torsional rigidity or stiffness of the car. In generations past, there may have been some concern there, but this is the same approach that many supercar makers use to not even have the roof be a stressed member, and either car should be just as stiff and handle just as well as the other. Lastly is looks. Now, while I can't tell you which one looks better than the other, it's too subjective, the HTC does give you a bit more of an exotic look, owing in part to the look of the nacelles with the top down. You can get them painted black with either just the nacelles or even the full windshield frame and roof to contrast with the body color of the car. This is taking a page out of the book directly from Ferrari, and in person I can say they look really good. In the end, looks are too subjective and depend really on what your individual tastes are. In summary, it really comes down to what you value most in the car. If you're looking for theater, sound, and the wind in your hair, then maybe the HTC is best for you. But if you're looking for the most possible performance, the lowest price, and the ability to heavily track the car, or maybe even go racing, then the coupe might be just the ticket. Fred's take. Alright, so with all of the above taken into consideration, what's my take on this? Well, with my C7, I went with a coupe, but I love the idea of a push-button drop top. While I plan to do some track time, I don't plan to be racing or spending tons of time at the track, So for me, it's going to be the HTC, provided the pricing with the rest of the car is around what I'm hoping. Now that said, there is one big caveat for me, and that's headroom. I have yet to sit in a coupe or hardtop convertible with the top up, so at some point this year, I gotta drive over to McMulkin and sit in one of each. Also, I'm gonna bring my autocross track day helmet along so I can see which one of those give me the best headroom. So over on the side, here's a quick recap of my current build spec from this and all my prior deep dives. And you can see the car is actually starting to take shape, which is pretty exciting. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, Fred out!